is ancient Greece, Charis, and ancient Greek community. You'll get the pun later on, hopefully. Okay, so I'm just gonna read. Also, I'm gonna say one more preemptive comment that I compressed the theory down a lot so I could talk more about the literary stuff since that seems to be more of a hit. But if you have questions, you should ask them at the end. Okay. He will not be persuaded. Amidst the chaos of the Trojan War, the warrior Achilles makes a resounding decision. He is the most valuable asset that Agamemnon has, and he alone can do as much damage as all of the Greek army. The Greeks, with all of their great warriors, need him, but he will not fight. Agamemnon, king of Argos, has stolen away his Geros, his war prize, the Lynesian princess Briseis. He has denied Achilles a luxury that was rightfully his, and by doing so, has refused to recognize his very self. Achilles' decision to cede from the war defines Homer's Iliad. Many have interpreted it as morally deplorable, as a temper tantrum. Pierre Bayle's famed encyclopedic dictionary describes, 9 years Achilles, fair as day, and valiant as his sword in battle, cried for his mistress, taken away, like little master for his rattle. But Achilles' reason for his withdrawal is greater than wounded pride or an arrogant search for personal glory. Morality is not the issue. His reason, as he tells Odysseus in Book 9, is thus: there was no Charis given for fighting incessantly forever against your enemies. The wrath of Achilles that Homer invokes in the first line of the Iliad, sing goddess the wrath of Achilles, is ignited with Agamemnon's theft of Briseis. While critics argue the motivation behind Achilles' withdrawal, the answer is hiding in plain sight, in Achilles' own words. His refusal to fight is a reaction against Agamemnon's denial of one thing, Charis. There are few works in the ancient Greek canon that do not deploy Charis at their pivotal moments. Beyond the Iliad, it appears with startling consistency in many of the most important inheritances we have from archaic Greece and ancient Greece. Within the Iliad, Achilles' exact phrase is repeated in Book 17, when the Trojan Glaucus becomes angry with Prince Hector for failing to win the body of Patroclus in a body-snatching conflict with the Greek Ajax. Glaucus tells Hector, "There was no Charis given for fighting incessantly forever against your enemies." Outside of Homer, in the later tradition of lyric poetry, Charis functions at perhaps an even greater level. In Sappho's famed Second Oxychron fragment, the lesbian poetess evokes Aphrodite with the temptation of Charis. She says, "Come hither to me, this holy temple where there is a Charis-filled grove of apple trees, an altar smoking with incense, a heavy drowsiness from the quivering leaves take hold of me." Pindar, composer of victory odes, dedicates much of his poetry to the exploration of Charis and to the trio of the Charites, the deified personifications of Charis. He addresses them thus: "By your aid, all things pleasant and sweet are accomplished for mortals. If any man be skilled in song, or be fair to look upon, or hath won renown, not even the gods order the dance or the banquet without the aid of the holy Charites." In the Theogony, Hesiod describes Zeus looking down at earth. "On it was much curious work, wonderful to see, for of the many creatures which the land and sea rear up, he put most upon it wonderful things, like living beings with voices, and great Charis shone out from it." The list continues. Charis is commonly translated as grace and thanks, but this definition implies as much about the word then as it does today. One is reminded of pre-meal prayers and a ballerina's arabesque. The translation is inadequate, as is so often the problem in translating ancient Greek text. Charis, so clearly central to the ancient world, seems to be constantly defined in terms of a larger referent. Even the French etymologist Émile Benveniste seems content to subsume Charis under the Latin gratia, citing the two concepts' parallel development. Benveniste describes gratia as ambivalent, a system of exchange whereby, quote, "the act conditions the sentiment inspires a certain form of behavior," unquote. Gratia, and by Benveniste's extension, Charis, forms a social interchange, an exchange. But Charis cannot be consumed into a discussion of gratia. What, then, is this Charis? One theory, following the work of Marcel Mauss, conceptualizes Charis as social interchange. Opposing classical economic models of society as composed of individuals pursuing self-interest, Mauss proposed that the collective is of greater import than the individual. Mauss's understanding of group identity is based on the idea of the group as the subject, a unified society that offers a system of total services. Gift exchange and the traditions of potlatch and sacrifice becomes means of enforcement. Those are some of the case studies that Mauss studies. In the exchange of gifts, the entire society is served. It was first and foremost classicist Leslie Kirk, following Mauss, who applied this appealing option of total services to Charis. specifically in the literature of the victory lyricist Pindar. She argues that Charis is a distinctly social phenomenon. Kirk posits Charis as enforcement of an economic system of exchange, pleasurable only insofar as it marks a gift that represents economic stability. In her view, Pindar provides artillery in the maintenance of the social system. So from Kirk's point of view, Achilles' complaint that there was no Charis given seems to indicate that he was motivated by a need to defend society, because the loss of Charis signifies a loss of economic interchange and equilibrium. In application of her view, Achilles is attempting to uphold society as the maintainer of the individual. There are at least two major problems with this theory, however, both in application to the Iliad and in close examination of Pindar and beyond. One clear oversight is in Kirk's tendency to construct Charis as an abstract sociological term, when it in fact has a much greater implication, pleasure. For example, in Book 14, we encounter Hera, the queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, readying herself to distract her husband Zeus, the mightiest symbol of potent Greek masculinity. The scene follows thus. In the lobes of her carefully placed ears, she put rings with triple drops in mulberry clusters, radiant with Charis, and lovely among goddesses she veiled her head downward with a sweet, fresh veil that glimmered pale like the sunlight. This Charis is radiant and shining. It aims to provoke erotic pleasure, an intimate loss of self, in the overwhelming Charis of the other. It speaks to the Charites, those charming, dancing, Arcadian goddesses who seem more closely allied with the idea of pleasure than a systematized legal society. The Mausian interpretation of Charis, as put forth by Kirk and others, disregards the entirety and meaning of implications of Charis, like the instance above. There is one person who does seize on the idea of pleasure in Charis. Classicist Bonnie McLaughlin presents study of Charis in her book, The Age of Grace. However, like Kirk, she ultimately appropriates it into a larger social system in which it is meant to uphold morals and enforce social stability. While McLaughlin acknowledges that a certain loss of self, that Charis involves a certain loss of self, she holds that this loss of self is terrifying and terrible to the Greeks, that the possibility of vulnerability was what spurred the exchange of Charis. So she's basically arguing that in giving, you suddenly become vulnerable, and this is so it's the threat of vulnerability is what inspires people to give. But I think that means that McLaughlin, seeking to redeem the pleasure of Charis, instead makes it functional. And while she seizes on the idea of Charis as a deeply layered social complexity in ancient Greece, Charis holds a specifically non-functional role for ancient Greece. In order to fully account for an understanding of Charis insofar as it offers a key to ancient Greek communities, I turn to George Bataille's theories on excess and expenditure. Bataille argues explicitly against Mauss. His whole work is actually structured as an opposition. He uses the same case studies, and where Mauss uses the word don for gift, he uses depends. So it's very clear rebuttal. He says that the living organism ordinarily receives more energy than is necessary for maintaining life, that excess energy, wealth, must be spent, willingly or not, gloriously or catastrophically. This has enormous implications for an understanding of Charis. The generosity of giving, the gratefulness of receiving, and the allure of pleasure are tied together by their expenditure. The joy of giving is inherently tied to the erotic pleasure of a spouse or the lovely glances of a gleaming charity. Likewise, receiving necessitates the joy of thankfulness, the pleasure in sharing a moment of intimacy. Achilles' objection to the lack of Charis is therefore an objection to a lack of intimacy, of the inability to exist as a subject totally within the presence of the brilliance of Charis. Bataille offers another way of thinking about this. Light, or brilliance, manifests in the intimacy of life, that which deeply is, which is perceived by the subject as being true to itself as the transparency of the universe. In the glancing gifts of the other, the subject melts away. All legal bonds of the totalized system are lost as societies sacrifice individuals so as to exceed their systems. For Bataille, social systems exist so that they may be exceeded. Charis, then, is the fulfillment of our nature as expending things. The society that forms from it is one of continual expenditure, where community occurs in the continual gift, that which destroys us out of our own objectivity and allows us to truly communicate. Let's substantiate these vast claims of Charis as social intimacy using the work of Hesiod, the archaic myth spinner who offers the closest thing to what today we might call a contemporary theoretical perspective on the culture and society of archaic Greece. Hesiod tells us that the deification of Charis leads not to one goddess, but three, the Charites. The Charites are arguably the most tangible representation of Charis and have long been subjects in the artistic consciousness, from the Francois vase to the dancing trio of arm-entwined bodies captured by the likes of Botticelli and Raphael during the early Italian Renaissance. Their tenure in literature is equally resonant and even longer. They are mentioned in Homer in terms of their unit as the Charites, but they are first named individually in the Theogony of Hesiod. For an analysis and report on any Greek god, it's customary to begin with Hesiod. As the curator of heretofore unwritten myth, he executes enormous contextual control. His system orders the world in terms of myth, accounting for and thus revealing a particular social existence. The Theogony offers an account of archaic Greece through the marriages and unions of Zeus. After establishing Zeus's reign, Hesiod turns to the production of modern culture. Zeus acts as the catalyst to each figure that he marries and sets that quality into being. For example, Zeus takes Metis as his first wife, translated, and Metis' name can be translated here as cunning. The section reads, "Now Zeus, king of the gods, made Metis his wife first, and she was wisest among gods and mortal men. But when she was about to bring forth the goddess bright-eyed Athena," and then it continues in the story of Athena that Zeus has to swallow Metis and then Athena is born out of his head. Zeus, the point is that Zeus, as the activating force of virility and masculinity, literally sets into motion the quality of cunning, of Metis, which in turn begets the creative wisdom of Athena. So Hesiod, through chronological genealogy, creates a matrix of contextual meaning, and the first precondition of this universe is intelligence. Zeus next marries Themis, or law, order, precedent, who gives birth to the next imperative feature of civilized society, the hours, also known more simply as time, order, justice, peace, and the fates. Hesiod's genealogy calls first for intelligence and then for the qualities that control intelligence, the ordering principles of time, order, justice, peace, and fate. Each of these qualities speaks to apportionment, to order and control that are necessary for the establishment of any society. With the foundation of an intelligently ordered civil society begotten of his first two marriages, Zeus next marries Eurynome, the daughter of Oceanus with lovely looks. Eurynome comes from Eurus, wide, and nomos, anything assigned or apportioned, law, custom. Her name is basically translated as wide custom. And she bears him the three Charites, or the three graces. Hesiod names them Aglaia and Euphrosyne and fair Thalia. From their eyes, love that dissolves the flesh seeped down as they looked. Beautiful is their glance from under their brows. He locates the Charites, the deified conception of Charis, as third only to the most fundamental building blocks of civic society. This proves the undeniably imperative and intrinsic role that Charis played for ancient Greece. Etymologically, their names grant an even richer substantiation of this. They represent Charis on a trifold level. The name Thalia comes from the verb thalo, to bloom, swell, teem in luxurious manner, as with heavy ripe fruit on the branches of trees. I translate her name as abundance. Euphrosyne comes from the word phren, which designates the parts around the heart like the diaphragm and the lungs, where the Greeks believed that the mind and the passions were seated. The prefix eu means well or good, so this creates an image of well-spiritedness, and it's often used as joy. So think of your diaphragm as being swollen as in laughter. Swollen, sorry. Aglaia stems from aglaios, meaning splendid, shining, or bright, also implying fame, and it also implies fame, and designates Aglaia as a kind of glancing brilliance, or more succinctly, gleam. Each of these, if it does not already betray a vault of synonymous imagery that Bataille would later notice and exploit, constitutes a part of Charis, that very same Charis that designates the exchange of social intimacy. The three Charites form a network, a web of intimacy that is necessarily greater than the intimacy between two people. I think that because they are three, and is saying that it's not just a two-person thing. They create a community beyond the give-receive system that Mauss investigates. They designate Bataille exchange, where, as he says, the human being is responsible for expending in a glorious gesture what the earth accumulates, what the sun proffers. Essentially, man dances, laughs, and gives festivals. Charis and its subsidiaries clearly imply a web of associations that extend infinitely beyond the scope of any one work. It is impossible to capture even under one word, as shown by the existence of its multiple forms. Charis is said in many ways, but it seems to always accompany one theme, social intimacy. In the literature of Charis, we find this theme again and again, in the proclaimed fragility of the intimate, excessive moments of joy, or in the fleeting, momentary nature of being.